You'll discover how to dispel common misconceptions in the world in this synopsis of Hans Rosling's book Factfulness. Introduction. Why should I care? Reframe your perspective and acknowledge the incredible progress being achieved. In an ideal world, reporters would always provide the news in an entirely correct manner, along with plenty of pertinent background to increase its effect. Unfortunately, people enjoy things that are both extremely simple and packed with drama, and journalists are in the business of attracting readers. As a result, we now have a distorted understanding of how the world actually works. The idea that people on the planet are in worse shape than they were before lies at the core of our flawed worldview. Yet nothing could be further from the truth than this. In fact, the world is less dominated by sexist and oppressive patriarchies than ever before, people are living longer everywhere, and poverty is at an all-time low. All of this progress has been made possible by a global economy that keeps helping people escape poverty and raise their standard of living. In fact, if middle and high-income nations are combined, we make up 91% of humanity. Given that 85% of the globe was living in poverty only 200 years ago, that is truly astounding. These analyses make it clear how far we've come and how we may all work to go over our limitations in order to see the world objectively and positively. This overview will show you why blaming pharmaceutical CEOs is probably stupid, why we shouldn't think of things in black and white terms of East and West anymore, why natural disasters are less lethal now than they used to be. Key Concept 1. Mega misconceptions, such as the East-West divide, keep us from having an accurate perspective of the world. I have a query for you. What has occurred to the global rate of extreme poverty during the past 20 years? Did it almost double? Changed not at all? Or nearly cut in half? You are one of the few people who correctly responded to the question if you assumed that it has almost been halved. Only 5% of Americans and only 9% of Britons chose the correct response. Among those who chose incorrectly were some of the most talented professionals now employed. Our innate instincts and what the author refers to as mega misconceptions play a significant role in why so few people have a thorough comprehension of the universe. Some myths are major because of how seriously they distort our perception of the world. One of the main ones is the us versus them mentality prevalent in Westerners, which holds that the East and the West are essentially at war with one another. This is often known as the archaic distinction between the developed world and the developing world. When the author lectured, he observed that many students still believe that the East was made up of nations with uncontrolled birth rates and where religion and culture prevent the development of a modern or Western society. They can never live like us, as one of Rosling's students expressed it. Who exactly are them, the East, or the developing world, though? Are both Mexico City and Japan still considered to be in the East? Are China and India still regarded as being unable to support modern cities? In 1965, 125 nations would be classified as developing because more than 5% of their children died before becoming 5 years old. Child mortality rates are a wonderful indicator of a country's general health, educational, and economic systems. There are now just 13 countries in the category. In other words, West and the rest no longer exists. Principal Concept 2. Our negative instinct leads to 2 further mega misconceptions. Another query is this: how many females complete public school throughout all of the low-income countries in the world? Which percentage is higher, 20%, 40%, or 60%? Are you beginning to suspect that the more optimistic response will likely be given? In fact, in low-income countries, 60% of females complete public school. Additionally, the average length of time spent in school for women in their 30s is 9 years. Only 1 year separates that from the average age of men in the world at 30. These are only a few examples of the incredible progress that has been done, progress that hardly anyone is even aware of. Why then are these benefits ignored? Our natural tendency to be pessimistic is one of the causes of the second mega misconception, which is that things are getting worse. In reality, the globe has improved globally in almost every single measurable statistic, from life expectancy to lack of poverty. However, as humans, we frequently concentrate on the negative. Around the world, 85% of people lived in extreme poverty in 1800. Now, that number is only 9%. Even though this is really great, you won't read about it in the news. News organizations are much more inclined to cover crimes, natural disasters, or any other dreadful aberrations from the world's otherwise wonderful direction. There was a lot less news to read in the 1980s, and entire ecosystems might be devastated without even one local newspaper story. Now that you have access to every newspaper in the globe, you and practically everyone else on the planet are exposed to more negative news than ever before. Due to the excessive exposure, it appears that in the last 20 years, things have significantly worsened. But keep in mind that for every earthquake or flood-related death you read about, there are numerous survivors who aren't being mentioned. Low-income neighborhoods are actually far safer than they've ever been because to improvements in readily available building materials. Only 25% as many people die now as did so 100 years ago as a result of natural disasters. Key concept 3. Our distorted perception of the environment is also influenced by our impulses for fear, size, and straight lines. Your brain will most likely inform you that a straight line on a chart that is rising continuously will do so for the foreseeable future. However, straight lines are uncommon in charts. Consider your own growth rate during childhood. For a while, it was likely possible to measure your height in a straight line, but after reaching a peak, it began to level off. The same is true of our third mega misconception, which holds that global population will keep growing despite the fact that we are almost at our peak. The UN forecasters, whose job it is to analyze population increase, predict that between 2060 and 2100, the world's population will level off. There are several causes for this, but the main one is that people tend to have fewer children when poverty levels drop. Due to the high mortality rate and the need to have children who could assist with farm or factory work, the average mother gave birth to 6 children hundreds of years ago. The average mother now has 2.5 children, thanks to advancements in education, birth control, and reduced levels of poverty. After the current generation of babies has grown up and had their own children, it is expected that the population will stabilize at about 11 billion people by the year 2060. Therefore, population growth that never stops or overpopulation shouldn't be a concern of ours. But we are concerned. This is brought on by our inclinations for size and terror. Our innate fear response stems from the fact that being terrified can protect us from danger. Our forebears formed this impulse during more perilous times when saber-toothed tigers and other tribes posed a threat to people. Since there aren't as many immediate hazards, we now frequently misplace our dread and worry about hypothetical dangers. Additionally, our size instinct causes us to exaggerate the risks that our fear instinct poses to us. Think about our dislike of violence. We are more exposed to news stories about violence than ever before, so we assume that there is more of it. However, actual statistics indicate a decrease in crime. In 1990, 14.5 million crimes were reported in the United States. That number fell to 9.5 million in 2016. Principal concept 4. People frequently overgeneralize and believe that particular results are inevitable. Getting the right data and giving it the right context is one of the best strategies to fight off many of our worst inclinations. If you heard that 4 million newborns perished last year, you would think that we live in dreadful times because of the immensity of that statistic. However, if you look up the number of infant deaths in 1950 and discover that it was 14.4 million, you will have a far better idea of the times we are in. Yes, in a perfect world there would be no infant mortality, but in ours, it's critical to contextualize tragedy in order to see progress. In fewer than 70 years, the number of infant fatalities per year has decreased by 10 million, which is a significant achievement. Furthermore, we must refrain from drawing unwarranted generalizations. The food in Japan is different from the food in England, for example, yet many assumptions, particularly those involving racial and gender issues, act as barriers to having an informed perspective on the world. Another query is this: how many one-year-old children have received a vaccination against a particular disease globally? Which percentage is higher, 20%, 50%, or 80%? Yes, you read that right, 81% of children worldwide receive some kind of basic medical treatment. This statistic defies the common assumption that some nations, possibly in Africa or the Middle East, will never have the right infrastructure to get these kinds of medicines to children and are destined to be forever mired in poverty. When you consider that many people would have thought it impossible just a couple generations ago, it is astounding. The perspective of seeing the world in terms of economic levels would be more correct than thinking in terms of tribes, faiths, or civilizations. This is effective because a nation that has managed to escape the lowest economic bracket would quickly experience gains in areas like education, healthcare, and the fundamental infrastructure, regardless of its religion or culture. Key Principle 5. People must consider various viewpoints and refrain from blaming certain people or groups in order to appropriately perceive the reality. Traveling and experiencing other cultures directly is one of the best strategies to prevent stereotyping. This is a fantastic approach to acquire diverse perspectives, which is crucial because adopting narrow perspectives is another major barrier to having an accurate worldview. Today, you would find young people who are prepared for a modern life in Afghanistan, one of the few nations still trying to overcome terrible poverty and the lowest economic level. Similarly, if you had visited South Korea in the 1970s while on vacation, you would have witnessed a country swiftly moving up the income scale under a military dictatorship, which challenges the narrow belief that only a fully democratic government can foster a robust economy. In reality, 9 of the 10 nations with the fastest growing economy in 2016 are not particularly democratic. The reality of the modern global economy disproves the notion that only democracy can promote economic progress. The world is inherently confusing, therefore it makes sense to consider as many different viewpoints as you can. It's also the reason why, as we frequently do, blaming one person or even one group for a problem is really short-sighted. For instance, pharmaceutical corporations frequently don't work on treatments for diseases like malaria, sleeping sickness, and others that only impact the world's poorest people. The CEO of the pharmaceutical business might get the blame automatically, but isn't it just him or her following the board members' lead? Furthermore, aren't the board members merely carrying out the shareholders' wishes? Or consider the current refugee situation. Many Europeans immediately blamed the traffickers when they saw images of dead bodies washing up on the shore when their shoddy-built boats broke apart. However, if you keep looking deeper into the issue, you'll discover that the main factor forcing refugees to board the shoddy boats in the first place is European law, which mandates that anyone traveling without a visa must have their status verified by the personnel of the boat, plane, bus, or train they're attempting to board. But because of how challenging it is, it never occurs. A good, dependable boat is not employed by any trafficker because European legislation permits police to seize the boats used to transport refugees. Key Concept 6. In business, media, and education, refrain from making snap judgments or exaggerating the truth. The last problematic instinct we possess is the drive for expediency, which causes us to make snap judgments that frequently turn out to be incorrect or simply undesirable. Our most significant issues are typically complex and call for careful evaluation of all potential outcomes, such as pharmaceutical corporations failing to conduct research into certain diseases or refugees escaping in subpar boats. And as a result, an issue rarely has an obvious answer. It is crucial that we take into account all potential outcomes before making crucial choices. This entails maintaining a worldview based on facts, despite the beliefs of well-meaning individuals who believe exaggerations will be beneficial. There is no doubting the seriousness of the climate change problem, yet some people are only interested in promoting the worst-case scenario while neglecting the best or most likely case options. They believe that in order to motivate individuals to act, fear must be propagated. However, over time, exaggeration can cause people to feel duped, which could result in climate change advocates losing credibility, which is something that should be highly prized. In all spheres of life, including business, media, and education, facts and accuracy should be respected. Always make sure your teachers are using the most recent information available. Our persistent West and the rest attitude is mostly based on inaccurate knowledge and viewpoints. Accurate worldviews can also be advantageous for businesses and investors. The time to invest is now, as all indications point to Africa as a rising continent of future enterprise. Not only will you be contributing to the growth of the neighborhood, but you'll also be in the know. While we should hope that journalists will be as truthful as possible when reporting on the world, readers should not rely on one source for all of their knowledge because journalists, like everyone else, are constrained by the same misunderstandings and instincts. Remember that full comprehension requires considering a variety of viewpoints. Final thoughts. These summaries' main takeaway is this. Factfulness is in short supply these days due to certain fundamental but significant misconceptions and the fact that occasionally our very human instincts can be used against us. While a lot of people think that things have become worse, in reality, a lot of improvements have been made in a very short period of time. The quality of life is better now than it was 200, 100, or even 50 years ago in almost every single quantifiable category. More people have access to health care, education, and there is far less poverty. People are also living longer. To see this, you must explore outside your single news source, acquire the true facts, and contextualize them. If you're interested in taming the chaos in your life, click the link below to get the book. Thank you for viewing.